Dr. John Demartini, welcome back to the Keto Camp podcast.
Thank you for having me. I was looking forward to it.
Me too. We did an episode several months ago, about 100 plus episodes back from this one, where we dove deep into your backstory, spoke about the neuroscience of gratitude. It was exceptional. So if you didn't listen to that or watch that, we'll put a link down below. Here's where I want to start today's conversation with you. I don't know if you remember, but you gave a lecture. You've given so many, but you gave one where I saw from many years ago, and you were referring to symptoms being a feedback mechanism from the innate intelligence of the human body. And you gave a story about somebody who ate 2 slices of pizza, 50 prunes, a sauerkraut, and all this food, and that person waking up the next day feeling awful. Do you remember that story?
I do. I sometimes change what they ate.
Can you give that share and make that perfect example of why looking at the symptom might not be the best approach?
Certainly. If an individual becomes an oinking pig and overeats, which occasionally occurs in some people's lives, and they really pile it in and eat way more than normal and get to a point where I've already overeaten, I might as well go for it. And they wake up the next morning, if they can barely breathe at night, getting a breath just to eat, because their full stomach is just full. If they wake up the next morning with puffy eyes, oily skin, headache, cramps, gas, stomach ache, maybe bloat, and then eventually diarrhea, and they go to the doctor, go, man, I feel yucky. And he says, well, what's your symptoms? Well, I got a headache. Okay, cephalgia. He converts English into Latin so he can sell them a drug. So they give him a drug. Cephalgia means headache, basically, in Latin. And gives him an analgesic, an antiflatulent, an antihistamine, an antiviral for the stomach, an anti-poop medicine. I mean, it gives them basically everything that is counterbalancing the symptoms. And this is a palliative approach, not a curative, not an educational approach, just a palliative approach. They may or may not said, by the way, when did this start? Oh, this morning. What did you do last night? I pigged out. You may not have seen that. They may not have asked, they're pharmaceutical reps, so they just give you a drug. You might have gone to a chiropractor or maybe a naturopath or something, or a nutritionist or whatever, and they go, well, when did it begin? It began this morning. Okay. Did you do anything odd yesterday or evening? Oh, yeah. What did you eat last night? Well, I pigged out. Okay. Well, your body is creating normal, healthy biological responses to pigging out. It's trying to get rid of the waste. So you got diarrhea. It's trying to get you bloat because you didn't have the ability to digest that much food at one time. The digestive enzymes couldn't handle it. You probably swallowed it faster than you could even chew and swallow and get saliva around, and it went in before the enzymes could break it down. And so you're getting response in the gut, bloat, cramps, gas, etc. All of the symptoms are normal, healthy, biological, physiological responses to your behavior. So giving it a diagnosis and putting on a diagnosis and giving a script, I don't believe the body has a deficiency of drugs. I believe it's doing whatever it can to try to guide us on how to live. And it's creating symptoms to wake us up on how to moderate our behavior and live wisely. Now, when I was in my 20s, I sometimes ate more than I need, and I would get those symptoms. I don't overeat. I don't ever have those symptoms today. I don't ever have any of those symptoms. I'm very steady, and I don't live to eat. I eat to perform at my peak on a daily basis because I'm doing what I love every day. I want to be able to be 100%. So I eat moderately. I eat quality foods. I don't have any of those symptoms ever, years. So the body doesn't create symptoms out of the blue, you can always trace it to a reason, or at least trace it to potential reason. And I'm a firm believer that we have overlooked what the body's wisdom is. Walter Cannon wrote a magnificent book called The Wisdom of the Body. And he says that we are perturbed by external events, or our perception of those external events. They could be toxic, they could be temperature, they could be things we inhale, it could be events, traumatic events or whatever, injuries. But our body will do everything it can to maintain the pH, the temperature, the physiology within a normal range for survival. And has an incredible interoceptive capacity and exteroceptive feedback system to guide us to do that. And this is what Walter Cannon was trying to say, and Claude Bernard, both Harvard professors, all great minds in the field of physiology, medicine. But what we've done is we have not honored the body, that innate intelligence, that inborn intelligence that knows what to do. There are thousands of feedback systems in the body. In the study of interoception, we now know that almost every transmitter, almost every biochemical signal molecule is got feedback systems going back to the brain and the hypothalamus and everything else to the autonomics to get feedback to make sure that each of those chemistries are kept within a certain normal range. Back to pH, back to temperature, back to circadian rhythms and the suprachiasmatic nucleus. I mean, the interoceptive capacity we have today from internal feedback, pressure and the distension from the gut, all those create feedback systems to say, don't eat until the food passes, to calm the gut down. Everything is set up to try to maximize our performance, maximize our potential, and maximize our authenticity. Because when we exaggerate ourselves or minimize ourselves, we go into our amygdala, which subjectively biases our interpretation of reality and causes a skewed reaction. And we create symptoms. And the symptoms are there not as a bad thing to get rid of, but as a wise thing to learn from. And we've oversighted that. We're not listening to applied physiology. We're just getting rid of the symptoms. We want immediate gratification to get rid of the symptoms instead of a long-term wisdom from the symptoms to guide us how to live wisely. I don't have symptoms. It's just not a thing, because I eat wisely and I live wisely and I do what I love and I'm more moderate. And so that's a very important reality and distinction in the model of healthcare and well-being, I think. We sometimes just overlook it. Applied physiology and applied psychology is rarely ever taught because it means they have to be accountable. And people don't want to be accountable. They just want to take care of it. They want to blame something on the outside and look for a savior on the outside to take care of things. A false attribution bias extrinsically instead of an intrinsic feedback system.
It's a beautiful reframe to understand that symptoms are actually a gift from the innate intelligence to show you something is wrong, right? And the analogy that I always give is that check engine light that might come off. You don't drive, but those who do drive, check engine light popping up during your road trip, you would pull that car over, open up the hood and see what's going on underneath. Now, you mentioned some mild symptoms. I'll call them mild, and referring to like the gastrointestinal issues, the diarrhea, the bloating, etc. What about things like cancer, obesity, insulin resistance, diabetes, heart disease? Would you categorize those as symptoms as well?
Yes, same thing. Let me share with you some cases. If anybody who's worked with diabetics or anybody who's got a family member with diabetics, you will probably notice certain personalities. You will notice that telling them what to do is not easy. Doctors are notorious for trying to get them to do certain things, not eat sugar, not gain weight, not do this. They tend to have a feeling like they're in control. They need to be in control. And if you try to get them to do something, you tell them, they won't do it. But if you make it look like it's their decision, they might do it. Now, what's interesting is what we find is when somebody has their sympathetic nervous system activated from a fight or flight response, from perceiving challenge in their world, the blood sugar goes up, the insulin goes down, the glucagon goes up. A sympathetic response to a perception. Pardon me. If all of a sudden somebody has supportive, nurturing behavior around them, that's what they're perceiving. And the parasympathetic comes online, and a rest digest modality comes on, the insulin does the opposite. It goes up, the blood sugar goes down, glucagon does the opposite, goes down, and the blood sugar comes down. And you'll see that hypoglycemics, you can tell them what to do, they'll do whatever you tell them. You can tell them to walk off a bridge, they'll do it. They are more submissive. I call them, they minimize themselves to others, where the diabetic usually exaggerates themselves to others. They're sweet, and the diabetic is usually bitter. They're usually in anger. There's a history of some sort of anger sometimes. So one is a sympathetic from a challenge perspective. One's a parasympathetic from a support perspective. And you see it in the personalities. And I've been noticing this for decades. And what's interesting is I go in there and I take the situation that they're challenged by and ask them how it serves whatever they value in life, what's important to them. And I stack up the advantages and benefits of it. I can actually get their insulin and glucagon levels changed, and the blood sugar comes down. Right on the spot, within an hour or two of doing this, I can bring the blood sugar down. I've taken people with diabetes. Yeah, we've done it. And we literally change that, because most of us store in our subconscious mind all of our emotions that we've never resolved. And they accumulate and affect our physiology, and affect our insulin, and affect our glucagon, and affect our pancreas and our liver and things. So that's just one small example of what's going on with biochemistry. Now, the same thing for thyroid. I used to notice hypothyroid women used to come in my office on a regular basis. And I started asking unique histories, because I saw patterns. Very commonly, they had some kids. They had an expectation their husband be around more to help them. They felt a bit resentful, but they were dependent because they were working with all the kids and they didn't have an income, and the husband was taking care of them, so they couldn't speak up, and they repressed themselves. And people that repress themselves, you see that the thyroid gland originates from the tongue underneath. The thyroglossal duct comes from the little foramen cecum, goes down and becomes lobed. And so the tongue has a lot to do with it. So speech and swallowing and food and metabolism have a lot to do with the thyroid gland. That's why if high hypothyroid, you have slow, slurred speech, which is a repressed speech. But you get hyperthyroid, you got a really fast-speaking person. One is afraid to speak up. The other one talks almost tactlessly. So one is self-righteous and talks and doesn't worry about what people think. And the other one is frightened to speak up, and they're afraid to speak up. And you see these personalities, and you see these autonomic responses again. And it's a pattern I've seen over and over again. So if I go in there and I change them and give them the anxiety of speaking up and dissolve their anxiety to speak up, and they speak up, and you can go and measure. It all comes the TH, the T3, T7, they all start going up or going down. You can actually regulate these. So we don't talk about that. We don't actually give people their accountability back. We rob them of accountability. We say, well, you've got this condition. You measure it. You saw recently, just the last 2 weeks, that the biochemical model of depression has got thrown out the window. They've been selling that since the 1990s. I've been telling people it's not true, but they finally acknowledged it on the new study. Found out that was a pharmaceutical gimmick, and people just assume they got a biochemical imbalance. But you don't just get a biochemical imbalance for no reason. You get a biochemical imbalance because you store up psychological issues that keep affecting hormones and transmitters, the signal molecules, and they show up as chemical changes epigenetically. So you see these patterns. And I'm going to give you an example of a person. This goes back to a very old view, but we just had a lady. I just worked with a lady the other day that just found out she had gallbladder cancer. And on the gallbladder cancer, it's also metastasized locally to the liver, and also to the antrum of the stomach, and into the duodenum, and into some areas of the small intestine. And so they're now starting chemotherapy. And they weren't sure if it had metastasized, so they had to go in there and scope it to find out if there was some metastases. They found it was metastasized. Well, what's interesting is, prior to this, this lady got a history of a bit of diabetes. We've actually neutralized the diabetes where she hardly even used insulin. She'd
Wow.
been using insulin since a child.
Wow.
Okay, that was got down. But all of a sudden, she'd been doing pretty good. She exercised, everything else. But all of a sudden, she ended up having a move to a different location. She didn't want to be there. She was kind of bitter that they had to move because of a business for a spouse. And all of a sudden, her identity is getting shaking. And she doesn't want to be angry because it's a beautiful place, but it's just her identity got robbed. She just changed her identity. And she was bitter. And then she also thought, I can't make any money. I'm dependent on a guy. And she doesn't like that. And the guy's also controlling all the money, doesn't like that. And so in the process of doing that, she suddenly has this liver cancer, this gallbladder cancer. And she was bitter and galled, if you want to use that metaphor. And also not knowing how to digest this entire thing and not know how to deal with that entire thing. And I see patterns of these types of personas. I had a lady that had uterine cancer. It had metastasized. So they just took out the uterus and the ovaries, metastasized small intestine, a tiny bit to the liver. They started chemo, a cocktail of chemo that seemed to be working against that from the biopsy. And during that first week, before she was starting chemo, I found out a little history of her. I spent 6 hours with her. Most doctors don't have the time to do that. I just happened to because this lady was a little closer to me and I took the time for it. Found out that she had not made love for 21 years, married to her husband. And was playing a martyr at her church. And her church belief system was the more you suffer, the better the afterlife. Crazy delusion in some respect. And her husband had a fling. And the reason why she shut down her sexuality is because she didn't want to make love with him again after he had a fling with some woman. But the more she suffered and the more she sacrificed, the more she was thinking she was going to get some benefits in the afterlife. This is a belief system. People have crazy belief systems sometimes. In the process of doing it, she's working. He doesn't work. He's got a aneurysm, so he doesn't work, even though he can go fishing. So she's taking care of this guy, kind of resenting it, doesn't want to have sexuality, shut it down. He's probably balancing it out with other means, as you can imagine. And all of a sudden she has uterine cancer, reaching a point, at the point where all of a sudden she found out that he was able to do lifting and everything else. And so she got angry at him and said, you need to go out and do a job, by God. You can do this and you can do that and you can lift tackle and you can do that and you can push boats and things, you can work. And you need to supplement, which caused a conflict and a fight. So she felt trapped and she also was in fighting and she normally didn't stand up to him. She just sucked it in and this came out. But she suddenly gets uterine cancer, right? Now this is theoretically, this has been going on in the aneuploidy and the cells have been going on for years and possibly so. But all of a sudden she's got symptoms and she's got uterine cancer. So I sat with her for 6 hours and dissolved with my method, the Demartini method that I teach in the break too. You know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
And I dissolved the resentment, as everything I could find on the resentment she'd had until we turned it into an opportunity, how it benefited her, who is playing the affectionate role to her, where her sexuality was in another form that she didn't want to admit at first, but she finally got to it, and the benefits of that and the drawback of all of a sudden he was the way she fantasized. And we sat down and we spent 6 hours navigating through the entire thing, the issue about the church, the idea about her sexuality, everything, until there was nothing but tears of gratitude after 6 hours. And she started to chemo. And she ended up having a magnificent recovery. In the next 10 weeks, there was tiny little loci left on the liver, a tiny little loci in the small intestines. It looked like it was done. And they were celebrating that the next chemo will be the last round. Looks like we're going to get this one. Looks like you're going to do fine. You will have to say you might have to watch you every 6 months or 3 months or something, but it looks like you beat the game. So it was a success case, supposedly. And they were literally celebrating their achievement on a particular night. And I was there to celebrate this thing because I played a role and everybody's playing a role and she actually invited me over. The following day, her daughter happened to go into a restaurant with a friend and found the husband with another woman they had the affair with many years earlier. And the reason being is he didn't know if she was going to live or die. He didn't want to work and didn't have the ability to work, supposedly. But this other woman had a lot of money, so he was basically doing a backup plan, which is understandable. If your wife's about to die, you got a backup plan. But that's not what a wife wants to hear when she's on the cancer game. So we're all meeting at the house, and the daughter is trying to keep a straight face and trying not to say anything because they don't want to put stress on the mom. He's quiet, and there's a strange energy that she intuitively picked up. Something's not right here. What's going down? And so finally she's confronted what's happening, because they couldn't speak up and look her straight in the face. And they said, okay, what's happened? Well, he spoke up and he said, what's happened? She said, please leave my room. I don't want to talk to you. And she got really depressed and really angry and really bitter. And she started having symptoms. The following day, it metastasized throughout her small intestine, back into her liver, and to some other areas, even into bone. Just suddenly, boom. And we went to the doctor, and I told the doctor what had happened. He said, no, that has nothing to do with it. Psychology, has nothing to do with this. What happens is the cancer adapts to the chemo, and it migrates. It suddenly migrates, metastasizes, and goes everywhere in literally 2 days. Not easy to believe it's just done that. But within weeks, they tried a different cocktail. They tried radio. They end up over-radiating. It ended up having fibrosis. It occluded the intestines. They had to resect the intestines out. She said, I don't want to live. I don't want to wear a bag. No man's going to want me. I don't want my husband again. She died 3 days later.
Wow.
So I've watched the psychology of these things, and people don't, some doctors just, they're pharmaceutical and they're radio and they're chemo and they have their models, and they don't necessarily look at the psychology. But what's interesting is the nurse that was there whispered to me, and she said, it's interesting, when I heard you talking to the doctor about what had happened here, the nurse, we get all kind of knowledge about what's going on in our lives, and we actually have bets at the nursing station who's going to walk out of here and who's not by their attitude.
Wow.
The doctors don't pay attention to that, but we do. And I said, thank you. I see this. I used to be president of the Cancer Prevention Control Association in Houston, Texas, many years ago. And that's where I started noticing patterns in cancer patients. And I found out that they have all or none absolute polarities many times in their language. And I saw this over and over again. I would never do that. My mother was never there for me. I would never do that to my family. They were always mean to me. Always, never is black and white, which is a non-resilient absolute morality, which means non-resilience. If you're neutral, you don't fear the loss of the things you call positive. You don't fear the gains of the things you think are negative. When you're highly polarized and it's all positive, you fear its loss. When it's all negative, you fear its gain. It's like a religion trying to tell you fire and brimstone, hell, and the paradise and the afterlife. And they polarize you, and then they make it where, oh, I fear of that, and I got to have that. And they set up a fantasy and a nightmare, which is easy to control. You can control people with that. But when you're actually in your objective center and your executive center, and you're living more objectively, not subjectively biased to extremes, when we have this subjective bias or extreme in these polarities, our resilience is gone. Our heart rate variability is off. No adaptability. And I find these in the cancer patients. And what happens is we activate what is, as Lineweaver and Paul Davies describe, we activate primitive genome toolkits, ancient toolkits between metazoa 1, metazoa 2, which is clusters of single-celled organisms before they become organized into organisms. It goes all the way back to millions of years ago. And those genomes come online, and they are similar to fibroblastic states and the trophoblastic stages in embryology. It's almost like there's a phylogenetic throwback, and there's also an ontogenic throwback to a primitive embryology and to a primitive history on the earth. And those systems come in where they were lacking oxygen and using a different glycosylase enzyme pathway. And these things are activated. And the evolutionary theory of cancer and the epigenetic source of cancer is going bonkers right now. This is the new thing.
Yeah.
In 1979, I did a lecture on that to about 1,000 oncologists. And they was like, okay, we don't know what to say. It's outside. It was way over what they were thinking at the time. But there's a lot of data on that that's supporting that. So our psychology, if it's highly polarized and it's in a survival mode and it's in the amygdala in response to avoid pain, seek pleasure, avoid predator, seek prey, and it's in survival mode, it goes to extreme physiological responses and biochemical responses. It goes back to a primitive behavior. And a lot of our illnesses are nothing more than regressions back into primitive function.
Wow.
And we go back to primitive cells. The earliest cells in life on the planet were extremophiles. Extreme acidity, extreme alkalinity, extreme temperatures, extreme pressure, radiation, gravitation, etc. And we find in these cancer cells that a lot of these are extremophilic in their genetic expression. So it's because we're not poised, we're not present, we're not loving, we're not grateful, we're not in transcendental awareness, we're in highly polarized states that we add distress, and then distress epigenetically is causing a lot of these problems. And it's even if we still use the chemo and all these other approaches, personally, I feel that having individuals sort through their distorted perceptions about their reality that's stored in their subconscious mind and bring those back into equilibrium, which I've worked for 5 decades developing a method for. If we do that, it's going to enhance the recovery process. We have a specialist up in Calgary, Canada, who's had nearly 400 patients go through that process. And it's got documents showing that they've made a difference in their recoveries. I mean, you can see the difference. Those that don't, those that do, and he's kind of observing this.
Wow.
And because they're more poised, they're more present, they're more grateful. So to say that the psychology doesn't have anything to do with healthcare is insane.
Wow.
It's insane.
Wow.
Any doctor that's not acknowledging that, in my opinion, is not paying attention to the literature.
So how do you overcome that, right? So what I mean by that is somebody has a family member, a wife, a husband, a sister, whatever it is, but they were diagnosed with cancer, type 2 diabetes, autoimmune disease, and they're going through that conventional wisdom, but they want to communicate with their doctor to find alternative approaches. But what I've come to find, Dr. John Demartini, is there's this white coat power. You know, it's like they got the white coat, you're in the hospital setting, and how do you have a conversation with somebody's doctor who's so in that conventional medicine box to explore other avenues? How do you inspire a family member to have that conversation with those doctors who are not willing to hear other thought processes, psychology, autonomic nervous system, etc.?
You don't. Those who believe no proof is necessary, those who don't know proof is possible. Waste no words on those that seek not.
Good. That's good.
Don't waste your time on somebody that's not interested in that. Just take command of your life. It's your life, and find alternatives and see if there's a way of working together and be more integrative in the approach. There's no reason to exclude one or the other. They both have a value. But my personal feeling is the two together is to their advantage. I mean, I really believe, I lectured one time with a guy named Bernie Siegel. And Bernie Siegel wrote Love, Medicine, and Miracles, cardiovascular background. And he saw people that had broken hearts. And there's conditions that are literally Takotsubo, but that causes a deformed heart because of a broken heart psychologically. And we know that they can cause arrhythmias, and they know that it can cause spasms in the cardiac blood flow. So these are things that are real. I have cardiologists that have acknowledged this. They don't have a problem saying this. Some don't want to address it, so they don't study it because it's time consuming trying to work with people's psychology, and most people don't want to do the work. So the medicine has gone in the path it has because of pharmaceuticals. And because, that company is, the objective is to sell a pharmaceutical. That's the treatment, is a pharmaceutical for medicine. If you go to chiropractic, you get adjustment. You go to nutritionist, you get vitamins. You go to cardiovascular surgeon, you're going to get something removed. Go to Mexican, you're going to get a drug. So each specialty, you go to nutritionist, you get vitamins. There's different people, different specialties. I'm not against looking at alternatives. You know, I mean, I'm just filming today. I'm filming a movie on that topic. We're doing a filming on, the viability of alternative approaches to healthcare. And I've got another lady that just tried to reach me just now that, is trying to do a raise awareness in that field, because some people are willing to take command of their life. They want options. They're willing to go and do the work. And for them, there deserves to be an alternative for them. Others just want somebody to take care of it. So they will approach it from that other perspective. And I'm grateful that they have that. There's a need for everything. You want to be inclusive, not exclusive. But sometimes medical and some specialists do not have the background for the other. They've never studied it. They don't know anything about it. They don't understand the research behind it. So they just say, well, do it. If you think that'll help you, go ahead and do it. Or they say, no, danger. And sometimes they don't do it. So you have the right to take command of your life and do research on your own. Now, there's lots of misinformation out there, and rightly so. If somebody with a medical background says, watch out for that. There is misinformation out there. A lot of people preying on that, opportunistic idea because people have nowhere else to go. Yeah. And that's true, but there's also real alternatives, and they need to be discerned out and help people get the opportunities they have. But I'm certain that I have many doctors that have used some of the methods I've got on stress reduction and dissolving things, emotions like that, and use it in their clinic. They have one of my facilitators in their clinic working with patients to help dissolve it on some of the patients. We find that a lot of autoimmune conditions are autoimmune, they're self-attacking. Yeah. They really have blame on the outside and their shame on the inside, and they're projecting it onto others. It was in biblical writings, it was talking about, pointing your finger at others, pluck the mote out of your own eye before you pluck it out of others. Or I think it was Romans 2:1. It said, you have people who you judge, but watch out, you do this too. Yeah. So what we do is when we blame other people, we're shaming ourselves, and that is an attack on self. And our immune system will now see that as something you want to get rid of, and it's acting as foreign and autoimmune. I had a really amazing example of this I've had hundreds of examples, allergies of all sorts, and autoimmune conditions, hives, and even I've got collagen and scleroderma and other collagen diseases that are autoimmune resolved.
Scleroderma. What about Raynaud's?
I just worked with Raynaud's this week. Just this week, we found out what it was, the psychology behind it. So the diet behind it, because
that's interesting. So I have Raynaud's, and it's gotten progressively better over the years as I've changed some things with me. However, I still get a flare up every now and then. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about what you did with the Raynaud's.
Yeah, well, in her particular situation, she also had, in the distribution of where Raynaud's was in her lower distribution. Some are in the fingers, some
mine's
in
my
toes,
fingers,
etc. Depending. Yeah. Some are, yeah. In the fingers, in her case, it was the toes and part of the feet. So there was tingling and numbing and coldness and discoloration, typical Raynaud's. And there's a sympathetic excess, which causes vasoconstriction that's very commonly associated with it. And so in this particular situation, there was a stress response, but it was also, she had discopathies. She had thinning of 3 discs, particularly L5S1, which is the distribution where the dermatome was, where there was Raynaud's. So we've traced the nerve up and found out the sensations going up the nerve. And then we go up there and she's got a discopathy. So she has what's called hyperimbrication of the lumbar L5S1 and L4-L5. And so it's literally crinching on it and causing abnormal impulses down the nerve. And then you put on top of that a distress response of a sympathetic, and the vasoconstriction is heightened. So she was having it. And there was days when it was much easier and days not. But when she's stressed, the musculature of the lumbar spine tightens up and compresses further and causes more abnormal impulses. And then the vasoconstriction is enhanced. So we start her on a stretching process, which is a plow. In fact, I put her through a plow position, which is a yoga asana. And we had her lean back and do this plow position. And all of a sudden she said, I'm feeling blood supply. I said, it's because you have hyperimbrication and you feel your blood. Now it's warm again. Great. And right now, while you're doing this, you're also meditating while you're doing this position. And so you're calming the autonomics and you're also relaxing it and opening up the disc space. And now you're Renaud. Right now you can feel the warmth back in your feet. And she goes, so part of it was physical and part of it was a stress response. Yes, but the stress response is compressing the lumbar spine, because anytime you feel you're unfulfilled in your highest values, L5S1 is the base of the spine, those muscles contract in the erector spinae group. So what happens is she was actually compounding it with these two factors. So I said, if you do the plow and we put some traction on it, we do a hyperimbrication maneuver to open up that space, and we monitor when it's aggravated sympathetic wise, so stress wise, I think you can keep this under management. But you do have narrow discs and you do have vulnerability. Now, I've also seen people that have in the extremities of the fingers and not in the lumbar spine, but they got cervical injuries. And so sometimes you find cervical involvement. I don't know if you've ever had a significant cervical injury, but that's worth investigating and check and see if there's the intervertebral foramen are impacting and blocking the flow of nerve impulses down, because they do. You have what they call piezoelectrical alteration electronics of nerve conduction whenever there's an abnormal position or been a locking of vertebra and there's a compression causing electrical field alteration on the nerve. So those are things that alter sometimes sympathetic response down the nerve. And so that's why you have days where it seems to be better. And you may find out, I take people with Raynaud's, is it both sides or one side?
It's both sides.
Yeah, I can sometimes pull the head up and pull a traction on the neck and stretch it forward and lift up the IVF and open up the IVF, and they can feel the difference literally while I do it. It just all of a sudden they can feel like blood all of a sudden, and they feel warmth, and all of a sudden it changes right on the spot. Wow. And they go, whoa. And then I put compression on it. I compress the neck, and all of a sudden it's aggravated. And so there's a spinal component. There's a stress response, because stress makes all those muscles up and down the spine tighten. We get rigid. And so those are factors. There's also diet factors. You know, we can use vasodilative niacinamide and things of that nature to open up the blood flow. So there's things that people do diet-wise. There's also things that tend to, if you drink a lot of water and less protein and fat, your temperature goes down. If you eat more fat and protein, the temperature goes up. So those are also factors that add to it. So if you're thin and then you eat a certain way and you drink a lot of watery foods, the temperature will aggravate the process, the Raynaud. So these are all factors in there. But they basically say it's an autonomic imbalance on the sympathetic nervous system. That's basically the causality of it. The question is why?
Right, exactly.
What's triggered it?
Yeah, that's super interesting, because I tend to be very sympathetic dominant. And again, over the years, Raynaud's has really improved for me as I work on balancing out the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. Something I've tracked as well, and you mentioned this word earlier, is my heart rate variability. And over the years, as there's a correlation here, as my Raynaud's has gotten better, meaning less flare-ups, my HRV has gone up. Yeah.
Heart rate variability has gone up. You've gotten a younger heart rate variability, probably 50 or higher now. I mean, probably lower now. And so now it's, you have the flexibility, and that means your blood vessels are also more flexible too.
Interesting.
They're being rigid or loosened by the autonomics.
Yeah. So my heart rate variability was in the 30s a few years ago. Now on average, it's in the 60s, 70s, which has improved. Along with my resting heart rate. Something that's very interesting. I want to hear your thought on this. My thought is that there's a high genetic component to what I'm about to share. My fiance, Natasha, her heart rate variability on average is around 160, which I've never seen anything like that. Would you chalk that up to more of like a genetic component to why we see that?
Is she athletic in any way?
She's a casual athlete. She's not an athlete professionally. She works out once in a while, but I wouldn't categorize her as an athlete.
Nothing. Well, and her personality, is it a driven personality, a more laid back personality?
She's introvert. She's an introvert. She has panic attacks from time to time. She has some drive to her, but I wouldn't say she has like a driven personality.
Yeah. Well, it's very possible that there's a genetic component. I mean, you don't want to ever negate a genetic component, but at the same time, if I was to watch it and see the fluctuations, how often has it been monitored to see where if it's that high? Is it fluctuating? Is it always that high?
So we use an Aura Ring, which is a sleep tracker, and we look at it in the morning, and it shows us the last 8 hours or so. So she got 130 to 160. We just got COVID a couple weeks ago, and both of ours tanked, but that was a huge stress to us. But 130 to 160 usually is our average.
Yeah. Well, I would check it by an alternative means just in case, because the ring may or may not be as accurate as ideal. Just check it against another form
Okay.
of evaluation on it and see, because if all of a sudden it's now 100, then it may not be all that abnormal. It could be the actual monitor itself that's a factor. So I would check that just in case. But if yours has been consistently checked by different means and the ring's showing the same numbers, then great. Then that's the case. But there may be a genetic component. She may also have very flexible blood vessels, and her heart may be really in good shape. So that may be genetic also.
Yeah, I'm a little jealous of it. That's why I asked you the question.
So,
So I
I've
want to.
taken people through what I call the Demartini method, which is my method on asking questions to help you become fully conscious of things you've been unconscious of, to balance out the autonomics. And I've taken people who've got a heart rate variability of X and done the method for, say, 2 hours, and done it and repeatedly changed that rate, that the heart rate variability. I mean,
Wow,
changed it
that's
and gone
amazing.
from 60 to 110 or 40 to 80. I mean, in literally 2 hours. So we
Oh,
have the capacity to change that with our perceptions. And that's why I know the mind body is real. And I just did another interview on that very thing just literally hours ago. So that's a very common thing that people, I don't think that people really, well, that's not true. There are many people that know that, but many people just don't. The average person walking down the street is not aware that they have the capacity to change their physiology. We
mhm.
have control over our perceptions, decisions, and actions. If we prioritize our actions to do high priority, meaningful, inspiring, and things that we would love to do that make a difference in the world and serve people, our healing is empowered. And if we
Mm,
also take whatever happens in our life and ask, how is it helping us fulfill what is most meaningful, and start seeing things on the way instead of in the way, and then making the decision to do both of those, prioritize our actions, prioritize our perceptions. Prioritizing perceptions mean asking how specific is whatever's happening in my reality helping me fulfill what's most important to me.
mhm.
If you prioritize your perceptions, prioritize your actions, I guarantee you your heart rate variability is going to go up right on the spot.
I want to talk
Your
a little bit.
physiology shows.
Yeah, I want to talk a little bit more about that. There was a book that came out, I believe it was 1989, by a gentleman, medical doctor, Dr. Larry Dossey, called "Recovering the Soul." May not have read it, but in the book there was a study that showed they could predict the first time Americans had their first heart attack, and they predicted 85% of the time when an adult American had their first heart attack, it was Monday morning between the hours of 8 a.m. and 9 a.m. going to a job that they resented and hated, which is exactly what you're referring to with living on purpose with your purpose, as you refer to the telos. The Greek calls it your highest values. You have a book all about that. So, could you give me an example, based off of what I just shared? If somebody's going through a big challenge right now, can you give an example of how these voids or challenges could be turned into something great, like a highest value?
Yeah. Well, first, let me say something about Larry. I know Larry for 45
Oh
years.
my gosh, of course you
Uh,
do.
yeah, I've known him a long time. I can't say I interact with him every day and I don't see him all the time, but we've occasionally crossed paths speaking. And I first read his book, Time and Medicine. What is it called? Space, Time, and Medicine, I think it was called.
Hmm.
And he was a lovely fellow, tall, lanky, lovely man, very, very bright guy. Love the guy. And we had an exchange way back 40 something years ago. And we had a great conversation. We didn't want to go to bed. We were talking because we were talking the same language and it was so inspiring. But that study, I remember that study way back. So I was familiar with what he had written about. And it's true. Most people have Monday morning blues, Wednesday hump days. Thank God it's Friday's week friggin' ends. And they end up not being inspired by what they do. And they found out something really interesting, that the cytokines, you got two types of cytokines, pro-inflammatory, anti-inflammatory, and they're autonomically created. And they found out that if we have an imbalance in those autonomics, you get an imbalance in those cytokines in part of our immune system. Our immune system is responding and must have both sympathetic and parasympathetic imbalance to have mastery of immune system. You get one side or the other, you get problems. You get too parasympathetic, just like you get too sympathetic. People don't realize that that's not the answer. It's parasympathetic. It's a balance of the two. But what they found is that people, when they were doing something they loved to do, and they were inspired by the work they were doing, like myself, their heart rate variability goes up when they work 18 hours a day. Their cytokines are normal, and their blood pressure's down. My blood pressure is 95 over 55 on average.
Wow.
And you don't have any cardiovascular risk when you're doing something you were inspired by. You love what you're doing. Dr. Denton Cooley, who I used to deliver surgery schedules for when I was young, and got to do his rounds with him and go watch him do surgical things in the domes and at Texas Heart Institute. This guy was a master heart specialist. And I watched him and walked the rounds with this guy. And he was helping people heal by the way he was communicating to me. He told me that I do the actual work, and my disciples actually do the work. I oversee them, actually do the surgery. But when I do the rounds, I'm doing the healing. Because he goes in there, I listen to his dialogues with his patients. And he was saying, Mrs. Jones, he'd hold their hands, look him straight in the eye, and say, Mrs. Jones, your surgery was absolute success. Soon you're going to be able to pick up your grandbaby. You'll be able to go out in the yard, enjoy the walks, be with your husband. And he would say things until they got tears in their eyes. Wow. You wouldn't leave that patient till they were in tears of gratitude. Wow. And had their heart open. Because he knew that was one of the keys to making that heart really get back on track. They had to be relaxed and not be anxious about things and overstressed about things. So he knew that. And he told me that. He says, love's still the greatest healer. Mm. And so that was a cardiovascular specialist, a world famous one of the most famous in the world.
What was his name again?
And I also got to work with Dr. Denton Cooley. And also another one that was, kind of famous also there. Bernard was in South Africa, but there was another one also. And he wasn't that same attitude. He was great at what he did, but he didn't have that same attitude. When I saw him work, he didn't have a bedside manner. Denton Cooley had. But Denton Cooley as the one that had probably the greatest outreach of people around the world coming for his surgery. Wow. So it was interesting to watch a real healer. But we have the capacity to alter that. Our immune response, they used to think the immune response was there to protect us from microorganisms during the germ theory era. And I've never been satisfied. I chose chiropractic because I didn't buy that. I didn't believe that. I didn't believe that there's, we're here to attack everything. I just didn't buy that. And I thought, because when the very first day I went into chiropractic college, there was a guy there, was a pretty interesting character named Dr. Cantor. He took his hands and he licked his fingers and he scraped the floor. And then he licked his fingers again. He says, it's not the germs that's our problem. It's our life and it's our body.
It's good.
And we're the host of those germs. And I remember him saying that, and I thought, that's interesting. And I studied microbiology and I studied virology and rickettsiology. And I studied these things. And they now acknowledge that the immune system is a seventh sense. It's a sensory system, picking up on the ratios of microorganisms in the body and parasites and everything in the body to give the brain feedback on what to do with the autonomic nervous system to regulate which microorganisms grow, because microorganisms are commensurate and they're essential. And they're essential for our life. For every cell in our body, we got 10 microorganisms. Oh. So most of our body, I always say we're a walking septic tank, or jokingly. But the point is that we're microorganisms, and so they live. We have to have them. They're necessary for us. we're not here to get rid of them. We're here to manage them, to balance them. It's an ecosystem. And so our immune system, instead of there to attack, it's there to regulate. And so instead of having this idea of attacking microorganisms and a hero that attacked it, fighting disease, it's changing. We're now thinking about what are we doing that's out of balance, trying to get us back into balance. And I'm absolutely certain that one of them is putting people on pedestals and putting people in pits. When you judge people and look up to them, you minimize yourself and you sacrifice for them, and your parasympathetic system dominates. And when you look down on people and resent people, you exaggerate yourself, your sympathetic system, because now they're challenging you and you're resenting them, and the sympathetic system. So you're throwing your automatic. Every time you judge, you feel empty because you're too proud or too humble to admit what you see in them inside you, and you have an empty, missing part. And we don't want to feel empty. We want to feel fulfilled, and love fulfills. And when you finally realize with the reflective awareness and a more intimate inspection of your own being, and look at what you see in them inside you, and you point your finger at them, you got three back, and you own the traits that you have projected, both admired or despised, and go back to loving people. Your autonomic nervous system stabilizes, your circadian rhythms stabilize themselves. Because during the day you oxidize, during the night you reduce, during the day you acidify, during the night you alkalinize, and there's a cycle to these things. And these things, if they are out because of all these emotions stored in the subconscious mind, we actually throw these out of whack. And the out of whack is not an illness. It's creating symptoms to let us know we aren't centered, not authentic. We're judging people. And we go around with moral hypocrisies about how people are supposed to be. Stop looking at ourselves with these hypocrisies and instead of loving. And so that's why Bernie Siegel and I did a presentation. We did a bunch of presentations on the significance of love and healing. And I've seen this over and over again. And people I think that's what happens. Think about what happens when people are really sick. What happens? The families come together and they get together and they say, I love you. If they're going to recover, that helps.
Yeah. Oh, that is so good. That is so good. Amen to that. I have three more quick questions as we have a few minutes left. So 3 quick questions. I'm really curious, just out of my own curiosity. Did you ever study any of Bob Proctor's work? Who's behind me here? He's passed this year. Did you know Bob? What do you think about Bob Proctor's work?
Well, I've known Bob many, many years. I'm not sure how far back it goes. Let's see. Well, we were in the movie together, The Secret, back in 2006-07.
Yeah.
And so that's a bit. And then I've known him probably for 8 or 10 years before that, I'm guessing. So 30 years, give or take.
Amazing.
Maybe more. 28, 30 years I've known him. And we have had the opportunity to lecture occasionally together, and we've done TV together and interviews together. And I have some different language than he does on some of the things we say, but some things are overlapped. And he was a very dedicated man to try to help people, live more full lives, more prosperous lives. He was mainly into helping people more prosperity-wise in business and financial development. That was mainly Think and Grow Rich was a big book in his life, and Waddle's book on finances were a big book in his life. So he wanted to help people live more enriched lives and more prosperous lives. But he also had, you can't go down the personal development journey without also just adding and accumulating knowledge over the time. And he's 20 years older than me, so I'm 68, and he'd be 88, but he passed away just, I think it was last year,
Earlier this year, yeah.
So it was earlier, was it this year? Yeah, because I remember getting called immediately the day he passed. I guess it was this year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was this year. Yeah. By a very close friend that lives right down the street from him, and they did an interview, and they interviewed a bunch of people that knew him, and we all did a thing for him. So yeah, he had a major impact on a lot of people. Of people.
Yeah, beautiful. That's really interesting. Next question is, the first interview we did, me and you, a few months ago, I said it was going to be one of the best interviews that you've done. Now, this is round 2. My question for you is this: how would you rate today's interview out of all the interviews you've done? Honest rating on today's interview. Give me feedback.
I love the topic. So I get inspired by the topic. So when I get to do this, I don't get to do this topic every day. I did a little bit this morning for a short bit, but not as much as we got to do. So I love this interview, and I hope that it touches people's lives, because if it does, it's our objective. I know that's your intention and my intention. So I love the interview. Absolutely. High rating. I'm going to, in fact, get a copy of it and make sure that it's out there. But I appreciate the topic, because I think people innately know this. They just are not programmed, and it's not mainstream thinking. I wrote a book, 1,000-page book on the mind-body connection, and on various conditions, health conditions, hundreds of conditions, and the possible psychology and physiology behind it. Because I was fascinated by it since I was in my 20s, early 20s. And I wrote a book called The Illusional Basis of Man's Health and Disease, How Perceptual Illusions Create Illness, back in, 70s, towards the end of the 70s. Wow. And so this topic is, I can get warmed up and go down the rabbit hole for hours on this topic.
I love it. Yeah, we'll do a round 3 in the future. I have a lot more questions to ask you. Last question is this, and I'm going to give my audience a free guide that you gave us. Last question is this, gratitude. I call it vitamin G. I believe it's the most potent vitamin out there. What are you grateful for right now, Dr. John Demartini?
Well, I can say a lot. I have the opportunity to have 10 new books coming out. So I think that's pretty cool.
Wow.
I have the opportunity to sail around the world. I had, when I was 17 years old, I had the opportunity to meet Paul Bragg, as you know, in that first interview. And I got an inspiration, a vision to travel the world and step foot in every country on the face of the earth and share whatever my research showed, and try to do what I can to make a contribution to the world. And I'm doing that. I get to do that every day. I literally full-time travel. I'm in Iceland right now, as you know, and we're about to go on another expedition. We just filmed it with the Discovery Channel. It's an amazing video. And
incredible.
We just did the first one. We're about to do another one. And I get to clinically work with people and in every area of life, because I'm interested in helping people empower all areas of life, and getting books out and getting a message. And they have Nobel Prize winners that come on my ship every month, and great lectures, 3 a day on average. And so this is an educational adventure exploration of the world, on the world, while I teach and do seminars every day. I do podcasts every day and seminars every day, 7 days a week. So I'm grateful. I got lots of things to be grateful, plus books coming out, plus movies coming out. We got the 55th and 56th movie in the making. Wow. And just, I could go on and on. I got the largest gratitude journal, as you know, of anybody you'll ever meet. It's 33 volumes. Some volumes are 900 pages. So it's a vast collection of gratitudes.
So inspiring, so much vitamin G. And you offered our audience a free guide. So if you all go to demartini.inc/ketocamp, it's a free gift, 7 steps to expand the next level of empowerment. It's a presentation by Dr. John Demartini. Where else do you want them to go to check you out?
Well, they can just go to my website and they can go and do the value determination process, or maybe somewhere down the line, they can come and join me at my signature program, the Breakthrough Experience, where I help people break through pretty well whatever they see in their way and turn it into on the way. Because anything you can't say thank you for is baggage. Anything you can say thank you for becomes fuel. I like helping people fuel their lives.
That's right. We'll put a link for that down below. Dr. John Demartini, thank you. You are a genius, and thank you for applying your wisdom. I really enjoyed today's conversation, and I look forward to the next one.
Thank you for what you're doing, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to join you, be part of this again.